I'm going to be going a little quickly because we're just going to touch the tip of the iceberg today. So I'm going to talk about the real effects of nuclear power in a short presentation. Nuclear power, as we all know, produces heat and electricity for decades, and that's the attraction. And as was already mentioned, it's a very concentrated form of energy, much more concentrated than other forms of energy. That's one of the main advantages of it. But that's not all it produces. It also creates radioactive waste that remain highly toxic for millions of years, literally even tens of millions of years. And of course, the human race has not even been here for tens of millions of years. So the question of keeping this material out of the environment of living things is really an unsolved question of the human race. We're not sure that we know how to do this. The industry thinks it knows how, but that's debatable. But it also produces nuclear bomb material for tens of thousands of years. And we see right now the bombing of Iran is justified in part on the idea that we're trying to prevent Iran from getting their hands on bomb material. Well, as a matter of fact, nuclear reactors do produce material that is useful for nuclear bombs. In addition, the structural materials that are used to build the plant in the core area where the fuel is, where the energy is actually produced, they cannot be recycled. They become so contaminated with radioactivity that they have to be buried as radioactive waste. We're talking here about some of the finest stainless steel and concrete, and it has to be buried. And in addition, there's ongoing radioactive pollution. That is, radioactive materials that are released into the environment routinely. So everything begins with uranium. Uranium is the key element in all nuclear fission technology. And the reason we call it nuclear energy, because it has to do with the tiny core of an atom called the nucleus. That's where the energy comes from. It's one of the smallest things in the universe, and yet it contains the most powerful force that we know of, which is called the nuclear force. Without uranium, there would be no nuclear weapons of any description, and there would be no nuclear reactors of any description. It all starts with uranium. Now, back in 1896, we got the first hint of this power of uranium when Henry Becquerel discovered that uranium ore, a rock containing uranium, gives off a kind of an invisible energy that will expose a photographic plate even if it's protected from light. And close contact can produce burns that resist healing. As Henri Becquerel learned, he got a very nasty burn on his chest, a radiation burn, very hard to heal. Now, you can't see the energy coming off uranium, but if you put the rock in a cloud chamber, you can see the tracks. These are condensation tracks. And you can see the energy just pouring off of this rock. It's invisible to our eyes, our ears, our smell, our taste, but there it is. And it's been going on for millions and millions of years without ever stopping. So it's an amazing amount of energy. And scientists were able to figure out that if you added it all up over a few thousand years, it would be enough to destroy large portions of the Earth. Except at that time, they figured there's no trigger to do that. There's no way to get all that energy released all at once because radioactivity cannot be shut off. It cannot be speeded up. It cannot be slowed down. There's no off switch and there's no accelerator. So you just have to watch out because it can also burn you. Now, radioactive disintegration comes from the nucleus. The nucleus is basically unstable for these particular atoms. And when an unstable atom will disintegrate and give off a kind of a subatomic shrapnel, which is called atomic radiation. These consist of particles and rays, which are damaging to living cells. And one of the things they do is they damage the DNA molecules and make things grow abnormally, so that many years later, people develop cancer as a result of exposure earlier to radioactive materials. Marie Curie discovered that not only uranium, but there are other radioactive materials in the uranium ore. She called them radium and polonium. She's the one who named them. And also radon gas. These things all started off as uranium atoms. It turns out that when a uranium atom disintegrates, it doesn't disappear. It changes into something else, which is also radioactive. And some of those byproducts are far more dangerous than uranium itself. Radium, for example, causes those burns I referred to. And Marie Curie figured, well, we can fight cancer. If it burns healthy cells, it'll also burn cancer cells. So we can use it to fight cancer because of its danger. These girls, unfortunately, this is back in the 1920s, they were using, these are teenage girls, young, and they were using radium paint to make things glow in the dark. But they all developed sicknesses by getting very tiny amounts of radium into their bodies. People thought they would not be harmful, but in fact, they died from fatal anemia, from bone cancer, and later on from head cancers. So we learned very early on that this stuff is dangerous, very dangerous. Here is a uranium miner back from about the 1970s. He's dying of lung cancer caused by breathing radon gas in the mines. Radon is also a byproduct of uranium, a natural byproduct. Here's a man, Alexander Litvinenko, an ex-KGB agent from Russia, who was murdered by a small amount of polonium-210. Polonium-210 is the very thing that Marie Curie discovered in the uranium ore. So these things, all three of them, polonium, radium, and radon, are killers. They're deadly. And they're all left behind in the uranium waste when you mine uranium. Canada has 220 million tons of radioactive sand left over from uranium mining. And it contains all of those materials that are not uranium, the radium, the polonium, the radon, and many others besides. Now, many years later, 43 years later, in fact, they discovered something else about uranium. They discovered the trigger that will release a lot of energy all at once. It's called a neutron. And when a neutron strikes a special type of uranium, it's a rare type of uranium. Only 7 atoms out of 1,000 are this type. It's called uranium-235. And when a neutron strikes the uranium atom, it splits into smaller atoms. And those smaller atoms were not existing in nature before. They're newly created, highly radioactive elements that are called the radioactive waste of nuclear power plants. They're called fission products. Also, it's given off more neutrons and a lot of energy. It releases a great deal of that nuclear energy. That's the energy of the bomb, and that's also the energy of nuclear power reactors. If you explode these things all at once, then you get destruction of a city. This is a single uranium bomb, just one bomb weighing a few kilograms of uranium were dropped on the city of Hiroshima in 1945 and destroyed the city. We have learned how to harness the energy of the fission into power plants to boil water. That's basically what a nuclear power plant is. It's a way of boiling lots of water, creating a lot of steam, and using the steam to turn turbine and generate electricity. Just the same as in an oil-fired plant or a coal-fired plant. It's just the way you boil the water. But at the same time, you produce all those fission products, hundreds of different varieties of highly toxic radioactive fission products. This man is he's an actor. He's in an ad for the Canadian Nuclear Association called Small Wonder. He's saying, isn't it amazing that this little uranium pellet can give as much energy as a carload of coal? But what he doesn't tell you, and what the industry doesn't tell you, is that if that pellet had been used in a nuclear reactor, this man would be dead. Because you have to keep an eye on that pellet after it's used for the next 10 million years. It's become one of the most dangerous objects on Earth. Why? Because after it's used, it's no longer uranium. It's been converted into those fission products. And those fission products are so radioactive, they will kill one of those fuel bundles there. Those are CANDU fuel bundles. One of those fuel bundles would kill any human being in a matter of 20 seconds if they just stood 1 meter away from it when it first comes out of the nuclear reactor. Now, the radioactivity dies down over the years, over the centuries, over the millennia, but it still remains toxic even 1 million years after being produced. And this is indestructible stuff. We have to keep it out of the environment of living things for millions of years. It's a heavy price to pay for a few decades of electricity. What do the extra neutrons do? I talked about the extra neutrons that are given off, but one of the things they do is the stray neutrons turn non-radioactive things into radioactive things. So for example, water. We have, in Canada, we have a heavy water called deuterium. It's just like ordinary hydrogen, only it's heavier. And it's not radioactive. But when it's hit with a neutron, when a neutron comes and hits it, it turns into a radioactive form of hydrogen called tritium. And that tritium can replace the non-radioactive hydrogen in the water molecules. And once it's in the water molecules, you can't filter it out. There's no way you can remove the radioactive tritium from your drinking water because it's just like ordinary water, only it's radioactive. Now, routine tritium emissions from nuclear reactors are measured in trillions of becquerels every year. Trillions of becquerels of tritium are released into the air and into the water and into the soil. Now, what is a becquerel? Well, a becquerel, of course, is named after that gentleman I showed you, and it means one radioactive disintegration is happening every second. So when you talk about trillions of becquerels, you mean there are trillions of disintegrations happening every second. I did a calculation for the Peace River nuclear project. There would be about 1,224 trillion becquerels of tritium released every year. I compared that with the drinking water for Calgary. They use about 480 million liters every day. And in fact, that amount of tritium given off by the Peace River project would be enough to render all of Calgary's drinking water unusable on a yearly basis, day after day. So there are other routine emissions as well. So when they talk about nuclear being clean energy, this is a lie. It's not clean energy. It releases a lot of radioactive poisons routinely into the environment. They just don't like to talk about it. They also release radioactive carbon dioxide and other things. So what things get activated? Well, as I told you, the water produces tritium. Air produces carbon-14, which is radioactive carbon. That can get into your DNA molecules. And even the structural materials in the area of the reactor, the steel, the concrete, the zirconium metal, they become dangerous for thousands of years because they've become radioactive through those neutron activation. Here's the longevity of some of those activation products. They talk about the half-life. The half-life means how long it takes for just half of the atoms to disintegrate. So nickel-59 has a 76,000-year half-life. You can see that these things have half-lives here in the thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions of years. And so it remains a perpetual problem of the human race. How do you keep this stuff out of the environment forever? You know, if everything rusts and disintegrates and decays in a normal fashion, well, when these things fall apart through natural organic wear and tear, they're going to get into the drinking water, they're going to get into the food chain. And how do we prevent that? That's what the industry says. They know how to do that. I don't believe them. I don't think they know how to do that. So what do the extra neutrons do? They do another thing, and that is they convert some of the uranium into a new element called plutonium. And plutonium turns out to be a nuclear explosive. You can make nuclear bombs with it. In fact, plutonium is a man-made material. It's made inside the nuclear reactor, and it will be around for tens of thousands of years after it's produced because it has a half-life of 24,000 years. That means that even after all the nuclear reactors are shut down and everybody's forgotten about them, people can still go and get that plutonium and use it to make bombs thousands of years into the future. So we are creating a problem for the future and for the present in spreading this stuff around. By the way, this is how much plutonium you need to destroy a city. That's the exact amount of plutonium that was used in the Nagasaki bomb that destroyed the city of Nagasaki in 1945. And that's the end of my show.